We will now be moving into panel 6, and this we will draw our attention to one of the most rapidly evolving areas of space security, the role of commercial actors. So in this panel, we will look at commercial actors and space security, evolving challenges, roles, and responsibilities. I'm very pleased to be moderating this panel, and I am joined by a very distinguished selection of speakers. So this will be a very compelling end to our OS25 conference. So over the course of yesterday and even today, you would have heard that several speakers highlighted the growing role of commercial actors in outer space. Yesterday, we even ended with a technology demonstration showing the innovation the private sector is bringing to space operations. So it's fair to say that commercial actors have become key stakeholders in space operation, whether providing us with launch services, operating satellites, or space-based data infrastructure. At the same time, given the dual-use nature of commercial systems serving both civilian and military functions, there has been some uncertainty around the operational parameters of commercial actors. Yet, we cannot take away that commercial actors can offer us invaluable insights through their day-to-day operation and technical expertise, which can help states and policymakers to make more effective policies and governance measures for space security. So in this session, we will dive into the evolving challenges of an increasingly commercialized space sector and explore an important question. How do we balance innovation with security in outer space? Join me in welcoming our wonderful speakers today. We have Jessie Ndaba, who's joining us online. She's the Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director of Astrophica Technologies. We have Anirudh Sharma, the Chief Executive Officer and founder of Digantara. Melissa Deswart, Professor of Space Law and Governance at the University of Adelaide. Professor Jinyon Su of Wuhan University Institute of International Law. So I will now open up the panel for each speaker to provide us with their brief and general remarks on the topic, and then we will get into the moderated Q&A session. I will move on to Professor Jinyon to take the floor to provide us with his opening remarks.
Thank you, Chelsea, and thank you, Unidia, for inviting me. It's a great privilege to be back. In my opening remarks, I would like to, first of all, commend what has been achieved by private entities in the exploration and use of outer space, and also to highlight the possible challenges that they may pose, in particular to space security. Ladies and gentlemen, the freedom to explore and use outer space is a fundamental principle of international space law. The Outer Space Treaty recognizes that all states enjoy this freedom in its Article 1, but also imply non-governmental entities may participate in the exploration and use in Article 6. States had previously been the primary actor in the exploration and use of outer space, but the landscape has changed dramatically in recent years. Non-governmental entities now launch satellites, transport astronauts, provide communication and remote sensing services, and even participate in lunar exploration. Their participation has promoted efficiency, lower costs, and generated innovations in space applications. However, their involvement in the exploration and use of outer space has been accompanied by the concern about their consistency with international law, just as the same concern exists for the activities of states. During negotiation of the Outer Space Treaty, the two superpowers held different positions on which actors were eligible to conduct activities in outer space, while the USSR held that states should be the sole actor in space activities. The United States insisted that commercial actors should also have the right to conduct such activities. A compromise that was reached is found in Article 6 of the Outer Space Treaty, which provides that states party to the treaty shall bear international responsibility for national activities in outer space, including those carried out by non-governmental entities, and shall assure that their activities are carried out in conformity with the treaty. I believe this provision is very relevant today, as today it is becoming increasingly difficult for states to fulfill their obligations under Article 6, primarily due to the growing number of non-governmental entities and the increasing complexity of their space activities. And in the same time, a school of thought has emerged that commercial actors need not comply with the Outer Space Treaty. This has happened in the context of information sharing, space mining, etc., etc. And some states hold the view that they do not need to be responsible for all the activities of their commercial actors. The commercial actors have also brought new challenges to space security in both peacetime and time of conflict. The peacetime military activities of outer space is primarily regulated by Article 4 of the Outer Space Treaty, as well as space-related arms control treaties like the Partial Test Ban Treaty. A wide range of military activities in outer space are not explicitly prohibited under these treaties, such as the deployment of conventional weapons in the Earth orbit. In recent years, there has been an increase in the militarization of outer space, and the idea of a comprehensive ballistic missile defense system, which would comprise space-based intercepting systems, has also re-emerged. And this has been very well addressed in the previous panel. Part of the military space systems will be procured from commercial actors. While these activities may not be prohibited by international law, the increasing militarization of outer space undoubtedly undermines space security. In time of conflicts, commercial actors are also playing an increasingly significant role. The general principles of international humanitarian law, such as distinction, proportionality, and necessity, also apply to outer space. Given that the dual-use nature of many commercial space systems, these principles are highly relevant to the involvement of commercial space in armed conflicts. However, the application of international humanitarian law remains underdeveloped. The involvement of commercial companies in recent international conflicts has also sparked renewed debate about the concept of neutrality. I will stop here and look forward to our further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jin Yuan, for opening up the conversation with reference to Article 6 of the Outer Space Treaty. This is something that I hope that we will unpack a bit more as we get into the moderated discussions, especially pertaining to liability and state responsibility. I will now turn to Melissa to provide us with her opening remarks.
I would like to thank the organisers for inviting me to be here for the last couple of days. It's been absolutely fascinating, and thank you to Jin Yuan for his comments, which I agree with as well. I'm going to take a slightly different approach to the discussion of the commercial space sector, because I think the way in which we talk about them is we assume that there's sort of one monolithic thing called the commercial space sector. But one of the questions we asked ourselves back home in Australia is, does the farmer who uses the satellite information to track where his or her cattle are at any one point in time on a station that's bigger than the size of England, consider him or herself to be part of the space industry or not? And I think it's fair to say they probably wouldn't consider that they are, but to some extent they really are. So this commercial space industry is not just, big operators or satellite providers. There's lots of other roles that they provide as well. So undoubtedly, the biggest development in space has been the commercial technology, the growth of commercial space companies, and it's due to sort of this complex relationship between the development of technology, the use of regulatory frameworks to encourage the development of that technology, and of course, rivalry. So, just taking as one example, something like the Commercial Space Competitiveness Act of the US really brought to the fore concepts of things like human space tourism, space resources. And the US is not alone in that, of course. But also looking at things like the move to change, government procurement contracts, recognising a need and responding to commercial pressure to be able to develop more quickly along innovative and use of novel technology in response to things such as the perceived slowness of NASA in procurement and in developing new things. So where you have the growth, for example, of the reusable launch providers. So changing the context, but of course, a lot of the regulation that exists still presupposes that, the launch vehicle is one single thing, a single bus that's paid for by one single client that does one single thing. So the sort of the way in which, regulation can develop a market but may not keep up with essentially how it's evolving. And quite rightly, we've put our faith in Article 6 of the Outer Space Treaty, the way in which it outlines the need for a state to authorise and to continually supervise the activities of those commercial actors, along with the belief that we've had that, those that are acting in space will respect that domain because they need to be able to continue to access it in order to make money from it. So we've sort of felt like the sort of people who are getting into space are going to look after it in the same way. So how much sort of government supervision is really needed. But now I think we're facing a concern about the potential for a race to the bottom. So again, we have the recent executive order in the US, the Enabling Competition in Commercial Space Industry, mandating the removal of impediments, unnecessary impediments to the granting of licenses, things like environmental approvals, and the worry that this may lead to forum shopping by commercial operators, combined with this growing mantra about space being a Wild West, which any of my students will tell you that is my least favourite statement about what space actually is. So you might have new operators coming into the market with less space heritage and believing that space is a Wild West where they can go and do anything that they want to do. Now, this sort of growth of the mindset of what I would call light touch regulation gives me chills. I'm old enough to have been an internet lawyer back in the day. And in the 1990s, we had light touch regulation of e-commerce, safe harbors being granted to platform providers, which have led precisely to the content control issues that we face today, where the tech providers are more powerful than the governments that might seek to regulate them. So I think that is a warning that we don't want that to happen to the space domain. So it's important to recognise that regulation shapes and develops the space industry that it applies to. So in Australia, guess what? Our regulatory, our piece of regulation is called the Space Activities Launches and Returns Act. And guess what our space activities in Australia are? Well, as it says in the tin, we do launches and we do returns. So, as these activities develop, you have space actors who are now looking around, they've come into the market, they're excited, and they're lacking customers who perhaps can provide them the opportunity that they might have been sold to them. So you now have competition developing for things like government and military dollars, where it is seen to be that there is some money remaining to spend on them. So I suppose I would like to, state that many of those companies are probably not particularly realising the domain that they are getting into. And I think it's very important to recognise that the obligation under the Outer Space Treaty on states to develop those regimes that will enable them to authorise and continually supervise their commercial actors, that needs to be carefully crafted and sustained so that they comply with their obligations under the Outer Space Treaty to behave in a responsible way.
I think you touched on several important points that I'm hoping we can revisit in our Q&A discussion. You touched on regulatory frameworks, government procurement contracts, environmental approvals, and also the importance of regulations. So I'm hoping that we can have a look back at that as a means of seeing how we can strengthen cooperation and address the challenges that commercial actors face. Now I will hand the floor over to Anirudh Sharma to provide us with his opening remarks.
Distinguished co-panelists and delegates, it is an honor to address this gathering today on a crucial role of commercial entities in advancing space security. When we started this company in India, space sector was still seen almost entirely through the lens of the states and national agencies. Back then, the idea that a private company could build and launch a satellite for space domain awareness or even contribute to international space security discussions seemed very far-fetched. But in less than a decade, the landscape has transformed. Today, commercial satellites not only outnumber the state-owned ones, but they define the rhythm of space. Over more than 11,000 operational satellites in orbit, nearly 90% were launched by commercial space sectors. Compared to what hundreds of civil-owned and military systems are in space right now. So we clearly know where the momentum lies at this point in time. Major spacefaring nations already classify space as a critical infrastructure. This reflects new reality. Commercial actors are the front line of the contributions that we are making to the resilience and security part of the world. We've seen how systems built for civilian use can become strategic assets. Communication constellation designed to connect remote communities now provide backbone for security and multiple other use cases. Earth observation satellites built for agriculture and mining purposes right now deliver real-time intelligence for defense agencies during the time of war. From navigation to space domain awareness, commercial capabilities are increasingly indispensable. But the challenge is the use of this in dual-use manner that sharpens multiple challenges. Orbital congestions, space debris proliferation, and the blurred line between civil and military systems at this point in time can create new miscalculations and escalations. These concerns will not only remain confined to low Earth orbit. As humanity expands, this will also continue to other domains like cislunar, where there is lack of norms, traffic management, and clear liability frameworks that will make the stakes even higher. Ensuring sustainability and a clear security in other domains will be very essential for the foundation of the new economy. At Digantara, we are building a data infrastructure to make things very transparent and provide orbital intelligence to operators that extend mission lifetime, to protect capital-intensive assets, and also provide sustainability from day one. Through the distributed network of sensors that we are launching to space and we have on ground, we track each and every object in space. These are satellites and even debris fragments. Using our software analytic platform, we today provide high precision catalog generation capability to sovereign nations and also provide conjunction assessment capabilities to them to be able to have actionable insights. And these capacities not only support operators, but also defense agencies and regulators. For us, space domain awareness is more or less the foundation for transparency and trust. By the way of promoting interoperability and data sharing in line with global data standards, we create a common operating picture that enables deterrence, strength attribution, and reduces risk of miscalculation. As we extend these capabilities to even cislunar space, our goal is to ensure that the orbits around the moon are mapped, monitored, and safeguarded before even the conjunction and contestation arrive there. The true resilience will not only come from the government or the industry acting alone, it will come from partnerships, both from state and commercial actors, and also the international bodies working together to create guidelines. At Digantara, we hold a very simple conviction at this point in time, which is basically the innovation endures only when the orbits remain sustainable for the future. And that is the future that we are committed to building. Thank you.
Thank you, Anirudh. Once again, just to point out something very important that you have started the conversation with, and that is the blurring of lines between military and commercial operations. And this is something that we're going to be discussing because this blurring of line brings questions up about targetability and liability. And so it also brings up more questions about where the red line should be drawn in terms of the targeting of commercial actors if they're perceived to be, if their services are perceived to be used for military operations, especially for an adversary state. I will now hand Jessie the floor to provide us with her opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Mai, for having me, and please accept my sincere apologies for not being able to join you physically and for not connecting on time. It is really an honor for me to be part of this important dialogue. As we reflect on this rapid transformation of the global space sector, I would really love to frame our discussion around the interlinked challenges and opportunities that some of my colleagues that have already outlined. So for us as South Africa and broader Africa, in context, it is how to balance the pursuit of innovation and profitability with the agent responsibility to ensure that activities in our outer space remain sustainable, secure, and transparent at all times. Without this balance, we believe that commercial gains may be short-lived and the long-term stability of the space environment could be compromised. Yes, my colleagues would agree with me that we are increasingly seeing the integration of commercial services such as satellite communications, space situational awareness, and Earth observation into military and security frameworks. While this strengthens the national capabilities, it really introduces ambiguity around liability, dual use risks, and the potential targetability of commercial assets, which is really a concern for some of us as commercial players in the sector. For emerging space nations like South Africa, it is really a delicate line to walk. We must at all times make sure that we put forward the industry growth without exposing commercial operators to unnecessary risks. And we also acknowledge that yes, the civilian space and the defense space have different mandates. So I believe that there's still a lot of work really that needs to be done in ensuring that we move towards emerging the two, if it ever will ever get to that, because we are seeing the shift. But is it really conducive? Is it really sustainable? I'm not sure about that. But as us, South Africa, in everything that we do, it is of utmost importance that we make sure that we do not compromise the goals of Paris. And for a developing nation like Africa, and I mean Africa, and I believe that the use of space for us is mostly for our contribution towards the socio-economic development. We have a lot of challenges as a continent. You know, if you mention security to others, they immediately say, let's speak about food security, forget about the defense, because as a continent, food security is a challenge for us. The monitoring of natural disasters and all of that. So really, we would love to be careful as the two sectors, we see them being emerged, that at all times we consider Paris and make sure that it's not compromised. And the fact that we as commercial players, we really align mostly with the non-alignment movement, and we continue echoing the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, that space is the province of all humankind. Therefore, at all times, socio-economic development using space is of utmost importance to us. So as we move forward, I would really like for us to highlight not only the risks, but also the remarkable opportunities for building a cooperative model that serves the industry, the states, and international community alike. Thank you.
Much, Jesse, for those remarks, and thank you for to the rest of the speakers for your general opening remarks. I now want to switch into our moderated Q&A discussions. Jesse, you just made a very important point about balancing innovation with space security. And so on that note, based on your general remarks, I would like to start off by asking you the first question. So Jesse, as the CEO of a growing space technology company, what do you see as the biggest challenge in balancing the push for innovation and profitability with the responsibility to ensure security and sustainability in space operations today?
Thanks, Chelsea. I was muted, I was not aware. So the biggest challenge that we see as commercial players is access to capital and investment. Commercial space activities are capital intensive, and we lack a dedicated space venture capital ecosystem, specifically in Africa. We have seen a lot of support from the international investors, but in terms of African venture companies, there's really lack of support there. So that is one challenge that we find, access to capital and investment, which then forces companies to rely on international partners. As I said, that we've seen a huge support, which is a good thing in my opinion, because it encourages that transparency that I was talking about earlier. However, it becomes a problem when there's an issue about national sovereignty and the protection of the IP. What we also see as a challenge as small, medium enterprises, we see market development and competition. Bigger players, they really dominate. So those are the challenges that we experience on the commercial space. Thank you.
Marks, Jesse. I think the main points that I took away from what you just said is the cost pressure that commercial actors and commercial firms operate in, and that's because this is a very competitive market. And then you also made briefly mention of the global inequities faced by small and emerging companies, and the lack of resources that they might have access to. So I now want to turn the question to Anirudh, who is also the founder and CEO of a growing space technology company. Anirudh, you are the founder of Antara, which is right at the forefront of space situational awareness and orbital intelligence. So from your perspective, what are the key challenges in balancing rapid innovation and commercial growth with the need to keep space secure and sustainable? And I'm wondering if you also face the same challenges like cost pressure or global inequities that Jesse just mentioned.
From the journey of building this company, when we started this company, it was just an idea back in 2018. We were working towards building a system that can potentially track objects in space. The goal back then, we had less than 2,000 satellites in orbit. So we were very unsure whether can we build a commercial company by doing what we are doing. So it was more of an accidental journey for us to start working towards tracking of objects in space. So initially my thought process was, we're building an innovative solution for tracking space objects, but we didn't have any answers to the questions around who would pay for it. So I didn't know about the balance that we can bring to the business of building an innovative product versus making money. At that point in time, because we were ignorant about that fact and we were just pursuing towards building a solution, we just started working on developing a product, and our goal was to build a system that can track objects from space, because all the systems that we've seen in the world were ground-based. And we essentially, in 2025, we launched the first space-to-space SSA satellite, which now provides critical information from orbit, unlike the ground-based sensors. So then we realized one point, which is if you want to keep up with innovation, you also have to figure out and evolve in terms of doing business. So at that point in time, the single biggest question that we had was, will we build this business based on the commercial interests? Will the commercial sector pay for what we're building? Because at this point in time, any commercial company anywhere in the world would like to build things fast. So we rarely care about policy and guidelines and all of that. We don't even think about policy guidelines. That is not the first thing that we ever think about when we're building something. So given our ignorance, we started building things, and then we realized policy also plays an important role. And which is why I often keep telling that if a policy is being built, it has to be built between both policymakers and technologists. And that's when I think we can find a balanced solution to any problem. So having launched a satellite at this point in time, providing data to multiple space agencies, we realized one thing, which is the current short-term market for us was never the commercial space industry or the commercial space sector. It was more or less the defense. Because what we started as a space sustainability company more or less transformed towards space security, where today we are providing solutions to most defense agencies across the world. And this creates balance when we are building something, because that is generating revenue for us to keep our plants up and running.
Thank you, Anirudh. So based on what you've just given in your remarks, I would like to start the next question with your input specifically. Commercial space services such as SSA sharing or satellite services are more readily being integrated into military efforts. At Digantara, you have pioneered SSA and orbital intelligence services that support defense, commercial, and civil stakeholders across multiple countries. So given the dual use nature, what are the key challenges your company faces in balancing commercial growth while operating in a sensitive military context? Particularly if you might provide us with brief insights on liability and operational ambiguity. And then I will move on to Jinyuan and Melissa to provide some legal perspective and insight into this question.
Given this industry and the niche part of doing space security or space domain awareness as a commercial company, one of the first challenges that we had to face was understanding how we can navigate the market access. Because when we started this company, we were an Indian company, and we never understood on how can we sell this service to other nations. That was the first challenge that we had to solve for. The second thing, given the nature of our business, what I can say from the liability standpoint was, again, I did not have knowledge about all of this before, but we've launched a satellite at this point in time, which is generating data, and we have ground-based sensors all over the world. I would say being a dual-use nature company right now is more or less a gray area when it comes to regulation on how you can sell to certain nations, and you have to follow the local regulations for you to be able to sell to certain governments. For example, currently we've launched a satellite, and that satellite is beaming down data, and the government of India is procuring the data, and they want exclusive access to the services of the service that this satellite is providing. So we're not able to share data, or we will not be able to share data with other countries. So the question that we've always had is, in a scenario like this, where the capacity is being used for defense or a military use case, will the liability be shared with the state, or will it be a commercial company liability? Today, I do not have an answer around how these things are sorted out, given the registration of the asset is taken over by the state, and we register our satellite under a certain jurisdiction. Beyond that, I think it's a gray area at this point in time to be a dual-use nature company. Given the standpoint where we stand in the world order, I would say space domain awareness or space situational awareness, even missile detection satellites, at some point has to be served for national security and defense agencies' efforts. So in the US, I've heard about a program called CASAR, which provides some sort of support to commercial companies when they're providing these critical services during a war kind of a scenario. But we don't have a global harmonized framework at this point in time to understand whether it is shared by a commercial company, the risks are shared purely by a commercial company, because the nature of commercial company is that we can maintain a neutrality given what we do for multiple nations. So given all these variable movements that we have around the world, it is difficult to arrive at a conclusion at this point in time. Given the growth of space industry, all of us talk about space industry generating money from, let's say, commercial space sector at this point in time, or providing commercial services. But I would say today's space industry only exists because governments are pumping money. Without government and defense, I don't think there'll be a vibrant space industry like it is at this point in time. Given all the nature of things that are happening around the world, it is important for us to have an harmonized framework, which I think the United States has already started working on. We need that across multiple other spacefaring nations.
I'm glad that we're joined by both Melissa and Jinyuan, who can provide us with a legal perspective. So I'd like to start the question now with Jinyuan. So from an international law perspective, how does the growing dual-use nature of commercial space activities complicate responsibilities for states and private companies? I would particularly like if you could share perspectives on liability, as Anirudh just mentioned. Who is liable? Is it the private company or is it the state? And also on the potential for misinterpretation of targets.
Thank you, Chelsea. Thank you again. I touch upon the challenges, that would arise from the increasing involvement of commercial actors in the militarization of outer space in my general remarks. Now I would like to elaborate on that in two aspects. One is challenges in peacetime and challenges in conflicts. And my observation is based on the presumption, which, if I interpreted your speech correctly, Melissa, you would agree that commercial companies, commercial actors shall comply with international law, just as states do in the exploration and use of outer space. In peacetime, the activities of commercial companies must not constitute illegal military uses of outer space, and maybe other obligations as well. Environmental protection, rules regarding the coordination of activities, like the due regard principle, and I think this is challenge on the part of commercial actors, and also there's challenge for states. They have the obligation to assure that commercial companies comply with the OST and will be held international liability if there's any violation. But for our purpose, I think in most cases, the acts of commercial companies will be consistent with international law, because on the one hand, there are very few limitations on military uses of outer space in which we can find in the Outer Space Treaty. And on the other hand, actually, many activities are dual use, and they can be carried out in the name of civilian use, for example. And here I would like to highlight one point, which is commercial companies and states are equally subject to the limits of international law in developing dual-use technologies. And I think it is, and this has happened very frequently in reality, and I think it is inconsistent to encourage commercial companies to do that, while at the same time discrediting states who are doing the same. I think they are equally for peaceful uses. And even if we take the PPWT, which is proposed by China and Russia, and even if we take that as the standard, machines like this one we see in this conference room would not be regarded as a space weapon unless they are used for that purpose. And second of all, challenges in conflicts. As commercial companies are becoming increasingly involved in armed conflicts, I think this presents challenges with regard to the application of international humanitarian law, for commercial actors, I think their systems may become military objectives depending on their contribution to the military actions. The fact that they are used for dual purposes may raise the bar in the test of proportionality, but in the end, they may be targeted. And for states, there's a risk of losing their neutral status, which could potentially lead to the spread of conflicts. There's another point that I would like to mention. It is always important to make a distinction between international armed conflicts and non-international armed conflict. And if commercial companies, for example, states alike, are involved in domestic armed conflicts, that's not a matter of neutrality, but a matter of interference in domestic affairs. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those remarks. I also would like your input, Melissa, on this same question, and also if I can just add a second part to it to hear input, and perhaps after Jinyuan might want to also give his input. So the original question is, what challenges arise when commercial space services are integrated into military operations, especially regarding liability and the ambiguity of who or what might be targeted? And the second part that I would also like to hear from you, Melissa, is how do you think states and companies can manage dual use risk within existing legal frameworks?
Well, look, I'm not going to really say anything too different from what has already been said. I think we have a situation where space, one thing I suppose I would start, the use of the term dual use, and I use it myself all the time. So, what does it actually mean? I think we probably need to unpack it a little bit more, because we tend to sort of throw it around and say, well, everything in space is dual use. And in a sense, it's kind of like, so what? So what when we say that? What does that actually mean? Does that sort of mean that it has a get out of jail free card, that, because it's dual use, then, okay, it's being used in a way that I didn't anticipate, so it's not my problem? And I think we're evolving beyond that. And so we do have examples where commercial operators have a product and it has clearly been used in a way that engages, people in the activities that are going on in hostilities. And at that point in time, the company has to make a decision about, well, is that something that I'm going to continue to provide to my customers, or do I now realise that this engages me in a situation where I'm engaged in combat? So I suppose this gets back to the point that I made in my earlier remarks about, we want to develop a commercial space industry. So, but how much nurturing and protection do we give to that industry at the point in which it is able to provide its services to defence, to governments, to be paid for that? Then I think it's clear that it is responsible for that, and that, it's things like know your customer rules. Just because it's dual use doesn't mean that you don't have any responsibility for what you are selling and what it's being used for. So I think states have that obligation under the Outer Space Treaty to authorise and to continually supervise. They're able to do that by whatever mechanism they think is appropriate, and most states, or many states, do that by way of regulation, and that should be imposed upon the corporations in terms of compliance with obligations under international law. I don't really think it's a grey area. Like, I think it's pretty clear. And once you've chosen to act in that domain, that is a consequence that you accept as a commercial provider. Now, you can change your corporate structure. You can divide your company into one that provides, military services, and one that only provides civilian services, and manage them in completely different ways. You can do whatever you need to do as a commercial operator, but you are obliged to comply with the regulations of your state, and those regulations should comply with international law. So that's the sort of second part of your questions, is like, how should states respond to that? And it's by way of responsible regulation. I mean, if we want space to be open for continued use, and this is the sort of threat situation that we're at now, and I suppose that's why I mentioned also in my opening remarks about, we've kind of assumed that because space operators tend to evolve from people who love space, that they will behave in a way that keeps space open. But we're getting to that critical tipping point now that if we enable, you know, conflict to occur, continued debris, non-sustainable uses, contamination of environments, that space won't be open for those things. So we need to be very careful that we don't just kind of throw our hands up in the air and go, it's dual use, you know, it happens. So there's lots of projects that are going on, things like looking at, you know, not what is the thing is, but what is it being used for, norms of responsible behaviour, all of those things that we need to continue to support.
Thank you for pointing out the the necessity to distinguish between dual use and dual purpose, which is also found in our space security lexicon. So feel free to look in our lexicon to have a better understanding of these terminologies. Now I want to switch up to the third question and open this to all of our speakers. We've been hearing about the concerns regarding integrating commercial operations with military operations, but now I want us to attempt a more positive direction, move in a more positive direction. And that is for, I would like to know your thoughts on how you think government and commercial actors can work together to strengthen cooperation in a manner that encourages innovation while also promoting space security and the goals of Paris. And if you could also provide us with some insights into what specific measures or initiatives would be most effective in achieving this balance. I will first turn to Jessie, who's online, to provide us with her views on this, and then we're going to move from Anirudh down the line back to Jinyon.
Thank you, Chelsea. In terms of working together with government as commercial entities, I've always said to people, I'm actually a product of government working together with private industry and the universities or academia, because I hail from this Sumbandila internship program that was sponsored by the government through Stellenbosch University. And we had our practical lectures from a company that was called Sun Space and Information Systems. So it is important for that collaboration. But as I've grown in the sector, I realize that we are leaving out the most important variable of this value chain, being the end users. So I think it is very much important to have the end users form part of the decision making in terms of what instruments needs to be designed or built in catering for the challenges that the end users know best. But then coming back to working with the government, I know with investors that they prefer forms of de-risking their investments. Therefore, it is always good for the government to come into place or into the table in supporting human capital development programs, for instance, because we know that with space, it's easy to market what has space heritage. But going to the investor and saying you need to design new technologies, it seems a bit murky for them to invest into a technology demonstrator. But if we work with governments in supporting us in developing those IPs and have those satellite launches, and I'm speaking as an upstream person now, it actually helps when now the commercial player is embarking on a commercial program, be it with the investors, because you now have space heritage. So we do need government, and they have instruments in place that could support the innovation and product development, which would attract the investors, in turn support the growth, again, and the sustainability, not only of the space players, but the work we do, of course, is not just for space professionals, but for humankind. So it will not only support the growth and sustainability of the players or the sector, but also contribute towards the socio-economic developments that we need to also look at all times as space players. So multi-stakeholder collaboration is in my opinion very important, because it's everybody in the same room saying, yes, indeed we need this, especially if we are going to embark on the defense and civilian side of things, which is, like I said in my opening remarks, that it is kind of challenging, because the two have different mandates. So having those in the same room, I believe would support the commercial players in identifying which route to take and what needs to be done. I think for now, yes, I'm in support of multi-stakeholder collaboration because of those reasons. Thank you, Chelsea.
I will now turn the question to Anirudh to provide us with his perspective on the question, and then we'll move on to Melissa.
So I think I focus on, we should focus on three things. The first thing is transparency with a roadmap where the commercial entities or commercial companies get to work with the state or nations, where you build a joint capability roadmap that allows a lot of interaction with the government to even understand what kind of initiatives are they planning. And then the second thing, that because of transparency, what can happen is responsible behaviors in space, because it is given by a state. So it is easy for commercial companies to follow and adhere to certain regulations imposed by state. That also encourages a lot of volunteered data sharing approach. So at least in the domain like space domain awareness, where we don't demonstrate any aggressive use of space assets for any reason. That's point number one. The second point is that we can use procurement and market access as one of the keys for us to be able to understand and control how commercial companies approach towards solving a problem. Like I just mentioned, you have to adhere to local regulations for you to be able to sell in certain states or nations that has a different set of guidelines and different structure in place, so that you can, sort of push your data and your services to that particular country. The third thing is, this is something that is very interesting that we are implementing in India, which is having regulatory sandbox, where if a capacity is being developed for the first time, we're just testing it out with the government, consulting with the stakeholders for authorization to understand whether this is okay to be built in this way, and should we share data in a certain way, what we can do and what we cannot do. That helps even the regulators to build a transparent framework for us to be able to maintain and adhere to international standards on a lot of things.
Anirudh just mentioned regulatory sandbox. So I'd really like to, you have been speaking a lot about the importance of regulation. So can you give us your perspective on that third point that he made, particularly looking at adaptive regulations on how this can be a pathway to collaboration between commercial actors and governments?
I look at examples like all of the science that has emerged from the International Space Station And, you know, we would all be well aware of the lists and lists of things that we use in everyday life that was developed as part of the science, that fundamental science that was done there. Laptop computers, Velcro, you name it, all sorts of things that then got picked up and commercialized. So, you know, the incredible ability of space science to transform life on Earth, and that's been done by, you know, commercial operators. Moving, you know, forward now into what's coming around the corner. I mean, I think things that we've talked about, or projects that we've talked about a bit over the last couple of days, have been Artemis and the International Lunar Research Station, you know, both of which contemplate the partnership between, you know, governments and, you know, various types of operators, universities, private partnerships. I mean, the potential that provides for more science to be done with the human return to the moon can only lead to, I think, to further transformative scientific development. So the way in which those relationships, you know, are managed and the rules of participation in those are going to be, you know, particularly important. So, for example, you know, Australia has an agreement with NASA to develop the so-called rover, you know, a typical pun by Australians, which is a rover to go to the moon, which is being developed by a commercial and university consortium, which, you know, is very much about, you know, developing fundamental science, involving students, involving startups, and what the learnings from that will be. And, you know, as I've said, you know, regulation shapes the sorts of space activities that a state may make a conscious decision that it wants to engage in. So, you know, does the state actually have, for example, you know, laws that deal with human space flight or space tourism? Does it have laws that deal with, you know, resource utilization? What are the rules that are attached to that? And as I said, for example, Australia has deliberately chosen, because of the fact that, you know, we have a huge landmass to be a destination for return, which enables things like in-space manufacturing, which can lead to products like novel pharmaceuticals, fiber optic cable, and all of those sorts of things. So the decisions that a state makes about what it will regulate and how that regulation will facilitate the development of commercial activities can be a very deliberate choice it makes about how it will play, you know, in the space domain. And you know, space isn't just about, you know, launch. It isn't just about hardware. It can be about also engaging in space science as well.
So the question is how to keep a balance between encouraging innovations and promoting space security and the goals of PAROS. My co-panelists have said a lot about, you know, how to encourage that innovation, and I believe states have you know, wide discretions on that, and a lot can be done. So I will try to focus on the other end of the balance, which is to make sure that commercial actors act inconsistent with international law. And I would like to mention a very specific question or difficult issue. Let's suppose a citizen of state A found a company in state B, and then the company launched a satellite in state C and registered a space object in one of the launching states. And then the company, its spectrum is licensed by state E, and the operation in space is licensed by state F. And then it provides service to state G. Then we have a very complex picture of which state should bear the responsibility of assuring that its acts are consistent with international law, because multiple states are involved here. While I think many of these states that I mentioned from A to G may be responsible to some extent, to the extent that it has the capability to control the activity of the company, perhaps it is, and this is my personal view, and I think this is an issue that should be clarified in order to make sure, commercial actors act inconsistent with international law. And I personally believe it is the state which authorizes the operation that should bear the primary responsibility and to continuously supervise its activities, and also to adopt measures if there's any suspected violation. So I think this is an issue that should be addressed. It is not a specific measure that should be adopted between the commercial actor and the state, but I think it is an issue of a precondition issue that we should clarify. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I see that we have a number of questions in the room, so I will open up this segment now to take questions. All right, I'm gonna start with Louis in the back and then make my way forward.
Hi, my name's Louis. I am a fellow with the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation. A lot what was said by Jesse really resonated with me about the priority that developing countries, African countries, attach to peaceful uses of outer space. And there's actually, I'm going to shamelessly plug my paper here. There's some great recommendations in this paper on how we can better reflect that in Paris processes, but also recommendations on the role of industry. And my question is about how you, the panelists, think that space industry can contribute to shaping international standards, norms, expectations of a responsible behavior in outer space, since at this point they represent such a large share of the objects in outer space. Thank you.
My question is for the entire panel. My name's Rohan. I'm representing the NATO Association of Canada. I'm also pursuing my a joint law and master's degree. My question is, I want to turn the discussion back to the private sector advancing dual-use space technologies. And as the private sector continues to accelerate the development of these technologies, there's a growing concern of having strong verification measures to ensure that outer space remains dedicated to civilian and peaceful uses. And jurisdictions differ in balancing private sector autonomy with public oversight regarding IP, security, and broader industrial strategy, especially as some states emphasize norms while covertly developing dual-use capabilities. And so my question is, as the lines blur between civilian and military uses, how can public actors establish shared norms and practices to govern these dual-use technologies driven by the private sector, and what specific global mechanisms are necessary to facilitate verification and accountability in this area of uncertainty while encouraging de-escalation, friendly competition, cooperation, and respecting the fundamental principle of state sovereignty?
Question, a quick one. Both the United States Department of Defense and the U.S. Space Force last year released commercial integration strategies where they talked about the need to do indemnification for commercial companies that are involved in national security missions and places of conflict. As well, NATO released its commercial integration strategy this year that said, okay, we need to think about indemnification. So I'm just curious to know, specifically for Anirudh, if he knows if India is thinking about that at all in terms of that for companies involved. And then for the rest of the panel, do you know of any other countries or international organizations or anything like that that look at indemnification for commercial actors involved in military conflicts? Thanks.
I will start by asking Jin-Yon if you'd like to begin the panel discussions on the first question.
I mean, with regard to the last question, I personally am not aware of any other practice. Sorry about that. So the second question, whether there's any mechanisms or other regimes that we could use to deal with, to make sure dual-use technologies, are compliant with international law. We have discussed a lot about, the forms of arms control, soft law, hard law. A lot have been said about that, and I think it is quite difficult as a matter of law to make sure that dual-use technologies will not be used, for military purposes or even to attack the adversaries in conflicts, and that's an issue that is very difficult to resolve, and we have to realize that this is a reality. And building on that, it is that what the law can do, perhaps, is to prohibit dedicated weapons, and while at the same time prohibit such behaviors, illegal use of space weapons, or those instruments which are not weapons in peacetime, which are used for perfectly civilian purposes. I think it is important to keep this in mind when we moving forward with PAROS in the future. Thank you.
I think the first question was about how can industry contribute, and I think industry does already to some extent. And I think this would be through things like the development of standards. And I think one of the issues that we struggle with, that we've talked a lot about, is the development of norms. Even more difficult, the development of binding legal instruments. Sometimes I think issues can be solved by way of more of an engineering principle that looks at things like standards. So how are we going to manage certain things? Well, let's just agree that this is the standard that's going to apply, for example, to space debris removal. How is that going to be implemented? So industry organisations looking at things like responsible uses and various things like confers and other industry bodies that look at how standards can be developed. In terms of private sector responsibility, well, I think it gets back to the answer that regulation is absolutely key. Certainly, under Australian domestic space law, there's very strict rules around regulation. And if something that was going to be developed that would have a use that looked like it was going to be a weapon, well, that would not be authorized, it would not be licensed. So there are conditions in there about national security, and so I think regulation is really the answer to that. That's the responsibility of the state to ensure that its regulation complies with international law. And I think yes, I don't have a knowledge of any other indemnification proposals with respect to commercial integration.
For the question on the indemnification, I think India right now is, given the fact that India just recently, it's been a couple of years that India opened up the private space sector, given all the stand that India has taken right now to promote private space industry, it's still early for us to work towards indemnification. And this is my personal view, depending on what's happening in Indian regulatory landscape at this point in time. Hence, I mentioned about the regulatory sandbox, where we're experimenting on what are the things that would enable private sector to build capacity and capability in India for both civilian and military use cases. And right now, I think we've seen a lot of moments where we did not have any budget around building space defense capability, but right now there is a lot of activity happening in India around building Earth observation satellites, which is sovereign with public-private partnership, and we have other capacities being built for military use, but through commercial companies. I think we will get there soon, but right now I don't think it's in the roadmap at this point in time, given a lot of things happening. There are a few important priorities for the regulatory agencies in India to solve for first before we get into indemnification.
In terms of the private sector advancing to the dual use, I'm going to speak as somebody from Africa, you know, with my experience in Africa. I really do not think we are anywhere near to that. Here in South Africa, there are talks of the Space Command being led by the Air Force, but we know that they don't have any capabilities. So they are talking to the South African National Space Agency and trying to see how the two can work together. But as the commercial players, it's still really a challenge for us going into that, especially on the systems level. On the component level, yes, there are companies like New Space and Cube Space that are designing ADC as components. The GPS, for instance, it is one major component that is that can be used for dual use. As a result, it is difficult for those companies to export GPS because the number of regulations and licensing that have to take place. Non-proliferation committee is one. They have to demonstrate or have or show more clarity or motivation that this GPS component that they are exporting will be used for a civilian satellite, for instance. So it really is not a clear one for us. I can tell you now that the lines are still blurred for us. I can give you an example of the EOSAT project that was started 7 years ago. It was paused due to financial constraints. It has now been resuscitated. For some of you that are aware of the South African space sector would know that the company that I was a part of when I joined space, which was Sun Space and Information Systems, which was a spin-off company from the Stellenbosch University. We had challenges. It was then saved by the government and placed under DENEL. That raised a lot of questions to a lot of space professionals in the sector that what is now going to happen if we are now placed under DENEL, because DENEL is a defense company. Now, with the EOSAT project being resuscitated, DENEL does not have enough capacity because a lot of people have left and started their own companies. The space sector it has now evolved. So with the experience that we had with some of the companies that I formed consortium with, I can name the companies that there's no secret in that, Dragonfly and Client Space Africa AACSA. They are mother companies because they have international partnership, had a concern that if the bid is coming from DENEL, should the companies, because we've always been the civilian commercial players, if they now participate on defense bids, does that mean this is a defense project or a civilian project? It was a bit tricky one for some of the companies to come forth and say, yes, we are open to supporting DENEL because they don't have capacity to build the entire satellite and have it launched. Until there were explanations or clarity that no, it is a civilian satellite. It's just that it was placed under DENEL because DENEL is the only state-owned entity that is participating in space. So for us as Africans, the lines are still blurred, and it is not easy for us to move into having our satellites being used for defense when in fact they were built for civilian use, because you have to clarify that. You've got to give the intended use of what you are designing before you would be given the license. So for private sectors to now have a satellite that was known to be for civilian use, for instance, let me make an example, that it was going to focus on agriculture or the mapping of the land usage. Suddenly, it now has to service a client, maybe an international client, for defense use. That could cause a lot of challenges. Also, geopolitically, we cannot, shy away from that, because space is highly politicized. Therefore, if we, as commercial players that have always been playing on the civilian side, now moving to defense, it has to be clear that the satellite that we're working on is a defense satellite or a civilian one. Thank you. I think clarity is of utmost importance, so that the licensing can be done accordingly. Thank you.
And thank you as well to the answering the question. I will take there's one more question from the floor. Goyu, so the floor is yours to ask your question.
Well, I understand I raised too many questions these days. But as to this topic, commercial space and the security, actually there are 2 or 3 spotlights in the previous OEWG or Paris GGE discussion. And I believe they should be the focus, in the following sessions. The first one actually is about commercial space role in the verification mechanism in future. So I have a question here to our private sectors, to Jesse, Andrew. So because the verification regarding to check a state whether just in compliance with its international obligation regarding the space arms control treaty. So definitely it's a game among the powers. So do you think that it's proper for commercial space to be involved in such kind of verification? If so, what kind of rule? Then how to ensure a neutral, a balanced position from the commercial space in this case, particularly concerning some of you have the contracts with the Defense Department of some countries. So that's the question. And another one, actually, another spotlight is regarding the application of neutrality law, international humanitarian law, and general principles of law in the context of the commercial involvement in others armed conflicts. So I have a question to Jinyuan and Melissa, since you are lawyers here. So just maybe just one question here. Jinyuan, just talk a little bit on that. Suppose the commercial actor from the neutral state just involved in or provide the military telecommunication to only one of the belligerents there. Its satellite, whether it just become a lawful target on the HL. Because here's, my understanding may be wrong. The application of HL, it's just about the relation between the 2 belligerents. However, in this case, that's the commercial space from the neutral state. So suppose it does not apply, then any other legal basis here to justify the military attack against the satellite. Thank you.
Ask Anirudh to answer the question and then move on to Jesse.
A piece on how can commercial companies, basically maintain neutrality by doing certain things for the state. So I would say at this point in time, it's more or less, there are like blurred lines, but the way I think this is being solved at this point in time is at a state level, when there is a regulatory body authorizing certain activity for you as a commercial company, you have to declare certain things about the nature of the activity that you're doing and the intended time span. So that gives clarity to them, which then they would abide to like international rules or regulations. So I think that's how we are sort of working within our nation at this point in time, where the national regulatory body for authorizing space activity at this point in time is checking and sort of verifying if we comply to certain things that we're doing in orbit. The second point is that when we're using these assets for the military use, for example, tracking of certain activity for the military, at that point in time, again, I think it's the state who is a customer at this point in time for that particular service. So given it's the state that's the customer who is using such a capacity, today I do not really have an answer on how does a commercial company maintain neutrality in such a scenario. The only way we are doing it right now is working with the friendly foreign countries for such an instance, given our home nation's, interests in working with several other countries.
Jesse, I will now hand the floor to you.
Thank you so much. So I think the question was, how do we as a private sector or commercial players maintain neutrality, if I'm correct? When I started, I mentioned that one of the solutions that I think would help to maintain transparency in ensuring that we do not compromise Paris would be international cooperation. We have seen a number of those, although we have not completed the projects yet. ARMC is one of African Resource Management Constellation, and we know in South Africa that most of the private companies have international investment, which in a way forces or encourages us to not only conform to South African laws, but also to international laws, because as space professionals, we are global citizens. Therefore, with everything that we do, we have to ensure that we adhere to the international laws. So to ensure transparency, I'm a full supporter of collaboration amongst players, be it international collaboration or domestic collaboration, but for transparency, it is best to have such. Yeah, I'm not sure if I've covered. I've lost the chain of my thoughts when my laptop died. So yeah, kind of disturbed. But for us as private sectors, it is important for us to ensure transparency and that there's clarity in everything that we're doing. Because I could be launching a satellite as a private company, but if that satellite is going to be used by another client for defense, government would also be involved in that. So to ensure that we protect the sector from the risks, it is important that transparency at all times is adhered to. Thank you.
I will ask Melissa and Jinyuan to please be brief in your remarks to the question.
I think the short answer is it is possible. I mean, the law of neutrality is so complicated; it would depend on exactly what the scenario actually was. But I think what you're really asking is there a circumstance where it could be? And I think the answer is yes. But we would need to work through all of the the scenario. As complicated as you got to state F, I think there. So I'm going to leave it at that. It's possible.
Thank you. So given the complexity of the issue, I agree. It's hard to answer the question in a very short time, but I will try. First of all, I believe the principles of international humanitarian law apply in outer space. It's not an issue which is. I mean, there's much disagreement. I think the the disagreement is more on how it is applied in outer space. And I also take a broad approach on the scope of IHL. In my point of view, the law of neutrality is part of IHL. So therefore, it also regulates the act of not only belligerents but also with the third parties. With regard to the private acts, and I think the difficult issue is that outer space law and the law of neutrality seems to adopt the different standards with regard to, the attribution of private actions. If we resort to Article 6 of the Outer Space Treaty, it could be argued that, virtually every act of private persons can be attributed to a state. And on the other hand, one may argue that, in the law of neutrality, there's a distinction between the acts of states and private actors, because for example, there's a rule that says states do not have the obligation to prevent its private actors to sort of trade arms with one of the belligerents, but it does have the obligation of impartiality. So the rule seems to be contradictory. So I think this is one of the difficulties in resolving because currently there's no specific treaty on the law of neutrality in space, but I think those principles like impartiality, prevention, apply equally in outer space. Yeah, thank you.
For the questions from the floor, I know we're out of time, but I would like to allow my speakers just about 30 seconds each to provide us with some concluding remarks, because they've done such an excellent job so far. So maybe we can start with Jesse, who's online.
Thanks, Chelsea. I'm trying to move my mouse, still thinking I'm using my laptop. Thank you so much for this important discussion. I really think it's about time that we do address this as we are moving to merging the two, or to rather seeing the two being enmeshed. I still think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of policy developments to ensure that we do not find ourselves doing what we were initially trying to avoid in terms of pursuing peaceful uses of outer space. So policy development is of utmost importance at this moment, in my opinion. And yes, like my colleagues have mentioned, it is doable, but clarity is very much important, so as we do not find the commercial space having the risks of being infringed or limited in where they can operate. I know with the defense space, a lot of times, if you have a defense client, they would rather prefer that you service just them. For instance, here in South Africa, with defense, everything they do is not about profit, but it has everything to do with security. Whereas on the civilian side, we have to ensure that everything that we do does have the capability of demonstrating that people in the grassroots will benefit from what we are doing. So it's not just about security, but it's about what the next person on the street is benefiting from this. So having the two put together, because they have different mandates, it's going to take a lot of exercise for us to ensure that we have policies in place that are still keeping the use of outer space peacefully and beneficial to all humankind. Thank you.
Given the nature of the sector and given the fact that the commercial space industry has transformed and grown so much in a very short time period, it is very important for the innovation to be in sync with the state's roadmap, which means regulations in place so that we create a transparent policy framework for innovation to grow and thrive?
It's important to recognize that if you have a commercial space sector, then you are commercial. So, in a sense, it requires you to operate as a commercial operator, to know who your customer is, to know where your funding is coming from, and to comply with all of the commercial, regulatory arrangements that would apply to you operating in a particular domain. So we know that there's been, a desire for governments to sort of prop up space operators. There's a lot of criticism about space for space sake. So if you are going to hold yourself out as a commercial operator, then principles of responsibility, sustainability, peaceful use, I think, apply to you as well.
I would like to conclude by saying that commercial actors have the right to participate in the exploration and use of outer space, including military uses. It's just that there should be a state which license it and continually supervise it. And I believe this is the state which have the primary obligation to bear responsibility for its acts. And I also believe that states should have the adequate measures to ensure that they act inconsistent with international law. To me, the difficulty is not on how to assure that, but how states perceive space security. For instance, we have seen that the doctrines of non-belligerence, qualified neutrality, even limited war, which have been proposed to justify, the involvement of commercial companies in conflicts. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers for this wonderful discussion to close out our Outer Space Security Conference 2025. I think what's clear from this discussion is that commercial actors are not just service providers, but they are increasingly central stakeholders in space operations, and we must find ways of how to bring them together in discussions related to space security. So with that, please join me in giving our panelists a round of applause for a wonderful discussion.